Mr. Timothy, pretty close role in it.
Michael Crick catches up with Theresa May's Chief of Staff, Nick Timothy, about his role in South Thanet. The election campaign now under police investigation. The police response was at best shambolic and at worst cowardly. The words of the coroner leading the inquest into the deaths of 30 British tourists shot dead on a Tunisian beach 2 years ago. Ruling that the holidaymakers were unlawfully killed, he singled out a policeman who fainted in a panic and a guard who took off his uniform to hide the fact that he was a security officer. But the judge rejected claims of neglect against the hotel and against the holiday firm itself, TUI. Outside court, the families said that they now planned to sue the company. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Darshna Soni, has this report.
Massacred as they lay on the beach enjoying the sunshine. 30 British holidaymakers unlawfully killed. But could their deaths have been prevented? Their relatives argued they depended on their travel company for their safety. But that travel company said it depended on advice from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Despite the resort known as being at risk of attack, their five-star hotel had no security review, had broken CCTV cameras, and on the day of the attack, just 3 unarmed guards on duty. Failings that meant an engineering student, aged just 23, was able to run around for almost an hour, killing at will, smiling as he did so. But today, to the anger of some relatives, the coroner said that legal precedent meant he could not find the travel company TUI guilty of neglect.
During the past 7 weeks, both the coroner and the families who we represent have heard shocking evidence about the level of security precautions at the Imperial Harbour Hotel at the time of the terrorist attack. It is now crucial that the whole travel industry learns from what happened in Sousse.
Some of the families have expressed their deep disappointment and say they are now planning to sue TUI. During the hearings, the coroner did acknowledge criticism of the company, but he found the gunman was solely to blame for the attack. He said that nothing the hotel owners or staff could have done before the event could possibly have made a difference to the outcome. He said that the gunman went to the hotel that day intending to kill as many tourists as he could, and he concluded that is the simple but tragic truth.
I just miss them conversations that I can't have with anyone else.
Ross Naylor was particularly close to his father. The two of them worked together at Severn Trent Water. Scott Chalkley had separated from Ross's mother, but found happiness again with a new partner, Sue.
He'd be quite happy just to live on his own and have this bachelor lifestyle, you might want to call it. But then he met her and she sort of brought him down a peg or two. You know when you kind of think you've met your match? I think that's what had happened with him. She's a good woman, big time.
Scott and Sue had booked the holiday to celebrate buying a house together, to celebrate what should have been a new beginning. On the morning of the attack at around 11 o'clock, they had been sunbathing side by side. Just before 11:15, a white van pulled up nearby. The inquest heard the driver still hasn't been identified. A passenger got out and took a parasol out of the back. Nobody paid much attention to him, but hidden inside the parasol was a Kalashnikov. When he got to the beach, Saifuddin Rizgi phoned his father, threw his mobile into the sea, and then started shooting tourists. This video shows the confusion and horror as people ran for their lives. One man tried to hide behind this boat before running into the water for cover. The inquest heard that there were 631 guests, with just 3 unarmed guards meant to be looking after them. If they had been armed, the coroner said today, the outcome may have been different. But he concluded this wasn't a realistic option. The coroner did praise the response of some staff. This video was shot by a hotel worker who wasn't trained in security but who tried to follow the gunman. In previous months, gardeners had to double up as guards. Rizgi was able to run around for nearly an hour, killing 38 people altogether. The coroner ruled that the delayed response of local police and military units was shambolic and cowardly. By the early afternoon, news of the attack had started to reach the UK. Ross Naylor was at work.
My first thought was, I'll just give him a quick call and just say, you know, I doubt it's anywhere near you, but there's been a shooting, so just be vigilant, you know. Kept trying his phone, Sue's phone.
In desperation, Ross sent out a tweet asking for help. It received thousands of responses, and local Tunisian residents began to help search for Scott and Sue.
It just goes to show there's bad out there, but there's a whole lot of good as well.
And that restored your faith in humanity?
Yeah, massively. Yeah, massively.
Ross's father had been looking forward to the holiday, but, like other travellers, he hadn't been told by his holiday company about an earlier attack in Tunisia at the Bardo Museum. 24 people were killed there, yet some survivors say their travel agent told them it was a one-off.
We have now heard the coroner's findings and his comments regarding the provision of security and visibility of travel advice. These are complex matters, and we have already taken steps to raise awareness of the FCO's Travel Aware campaign.
TUI said it relied on travel guidance from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and that the FCO hadn't changed its travel advice following the Bardo attack, but should it have done? In December 2014, the Islamic State group issued a video in which Tunisian fighters warned they would target tourists. And its media arm posted a tweet boasting that they were planning an attack that would overshadow Bardo. So why wasn't the advice changed? Perhaps tellingly, the FCO's Jane Marriott told the court that the government had to consider the diplomatic implications and the potential damage to the economy of Tunisia, a country emerging from the Arab Spring. What was the important thing about the inquest for you?
In a sense, to get some answers. It's distressing, but I needed to know for sure.
The inquest heard that Scott Chalkley and Sue Davey, like all of the victims, never stood a chance against the gunman. And yet, Ross remains philosophical about what happened.
You know, security would have helped, that sort of thing. Maybe they could have given more warnings, but I still think that it may not stop people from going, because you could go anywhere in the world and something happen.
The FCO didn't respond to specific criticism, but told us tonight that it hoped the inquest process had been of some help to the families.
Darshna Soni reporting. Now, earlier I spoke to Cheryl Stollery, whose husband John was killed in the attack, and to Daniel Clifford, who lost his mother-in-law and father-in-law, Dennis and Elaine Thwaites. I began by asking them if they'd now come to terms with their loss.
No, to be perfectly honest, I don't think I've really accepted that he's gone yet. I know that he has, but I don't think I've accepted that he's gone, because that means then I would have to acknowledge what I'm left with. And I don't like to think about that either.
It was your father-in-law, Daniel. How's the family managed since?
You never expect you're going to be in this position.
He was a bit of a hero, wasn't he?
He was. You know, from a family makeup of a small family of four, a close family of four, and it's now halved. It's just Lindsay and I and our wider family.
And your reaction to today, to the court case, to the decision?
None of us can bring our loved ones back. We wish we'd got a magic wand, but we can't do that. So our hopes are on the recommendations that the coroner can make that will make a difference, a positive, proactive difference to prevent other people from finding themselves in a situation that I, Danny's family and all the others have found themselves in.
The trouble is, it's not an industry which has sort of done much about this problem in the past, and I don't know to what extent you have any confidence that actually anything will change.
It's up to us as people now to try and influence that change.
I'm particularly asking tour operators, tour companies, those who set the standards, who put in place the codes of conduct, to raise the bar and work together with government agencies to make sure that those security arrangements and the information sharing processes are suitably in place to safeguard holidaymakers.
Until all this is done, will you really find any closure?
This, unfortunately, now we have this for the rest of our lives, and if it takes months, if it takes years, then we'll push forward.
Do you have flashbacks, nightmares, or
Of course. It's not something that's just going to easily go away. What happened out there in Tunisia was horrendous, and it's not just for me. We all have this burden to carry from the different levels of experience that we all went through on that day. It's not something that I particularly talk about. It's not something I want to talk about. It's something that I have to learn to live with.
Well, Cheryl, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and thank you, Daniel, too. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Now, what price a knighthood? Ask Sir Philip Green, and he might say £363 million. That is the amount that the former owner of BHS today agreed to pay into the company's pension scheme. The firm went bust with a massive hole in its fund. In the previous years, the businessman had benefited from hundreds of millions of pounds in dividends from the company. Well, today's settlement brings to an end months of negotiations with the pensions regulator. But will it bring to an end calls for Sir Philip Green to be stripped of his knighthood? Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, reports.
The collapse of BHS wasn't just the loss of 11,000 jobs and the disappearance of a former darling of the high street. It also placed in jeopardy the future of all its workers' pensions and triggered one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent years. At the centre of it all, this man, Sir Philip Green. The demise of BHS was also an embarrassment for the political class here at Westminster, who for years on both sides of the House had held up Sir Philip Green as the model British businessman. But his reputation was shattered by his apparent reluctance to plug the mammoth BHS pension gap and the sense that he had to be dragged kicking and screaming to today's final settlement. Sir Philip has now agreed to pay £363 million of his own money to plug the gap. Cash that means BHS staff will now get the pension they were originally promised, though a compromise between Sir Philip and the regulator means the payouts over the years won't go up as fast. The former BHS boss apologised for what he called a sorry chapter, one that saw him grilled by MPs and pilloried by the press.
The last 4 weeks, I could be a murderer, the way they're writing about me.
And even led to calls for him to be stripped of his knighthood.
Employers all over Britain pay their pension dues on time and don't expect honours or credit for it. So I don't think Philip Green deserves to be thanked for paying the money that he probably should have been paying from day one. He's put his workers through a miserable time, and it's finally right that the money's been paid.
The crisis began when Sir Philip sold BHS to Dominic Chappell, a man with no retail experience, in 2015 for just £1. A year later, it collapsed. But over the years, Sir Philip had paid himself millions of pounds in dividends from BHS, and the regulator determined that he should be responsible for the workers' pensions.
Just looking back, do you wish that you had perhaps acted sooner on this whole issue and that it hadn't blown up into the sort of political fraught, argument that it did?
We launched our investigation into possible avoidance in this situation as soon as we heard about the sale of BHS. It's really important that we are robust in these situations, that we are prepared to use our avoidance powers if that is appropriate to do so, and to progress in investigations quickly as we did in this case.
So the case against Sir Philip Green is closed. £363 million of his money is tonight sitting with the regulator, and workers can breathe a sigh of relief. But the same cannot be said for Dominic Chappell, the man at the helm when BHS actually went down. The case against him remains open.
Siobhan Kennedy, our business editor. Well, Sir Philip Green said that his voluntary contribution to up to £363 million will enable the trustees of the BHS pension schemes to achieve a significantly better outcome, he says, than the schemes entering the Pension Protection Fund, which, he said, was the goal from the outset. Well, joining me now is Labour MP Frank Field, who chairs the Work and Pension Select Committee and led the campaign to get Philip Green to plug that gap in the pension scheme. Welcome to the programme, Frank Field. Are you satisfied now?
I'm satisfied in the sense this is what the pension regulator believes she can get. It's not as good as I think the pensioners deserve, because although they will be getting the pension at a level that they thought of when they start to draw their pension. The pension will be increased at a lower rate of inflation than it would otherwise be. But this is, I think, a good day, if one can view anything of this saga as a good day. But it's not the end of the story. There's a whole bevy of reports still to come which look at Sir Philip Green's behaviour in pulling this great company down.
Okay.
So while there's some end, I hope, for the pensioners, they feel that, it's not the end for Sir Philip Green.
But that was the big issue, wasn't it? The big issue was the hole in the pensions fund. He has plugged that now. To be fair to him, the pensions regulator recommended £350 million. He's gone beyond that with 363. And essentially the pensioners will get what they thought they were going to get at the beginning of this whole story before the company went belly up. That is, you know, it's time to bury the hatchet, isn't it, really?
I've said what a good day it is for pensioners. I hope they believe that. We'll see in the following days whether they do or whether I'm being too optimistic on that. I'm puzzled why Sir Philip couldn't do this at the very beginning. Why did he drag and let the pensioners through this mire that he has done? As well, why has he done it to himself and his family? Why has he allowed their names to be dragged through the muck as he has done? And as I say, there are other important questions that arise from this which are different to do with the pensions. And I'm sorry, in a sense, you feel it's personalised.
But you made it quite personal in the House of Commons. I mean, you really laid into him, didn't you, in quite a vociferous way.
Well, I thought, I always think I'm so gentle, so it's rather good that I didn't. It's rather good I didn't.
Well, you are now.
It's rather good that I didn't take against him, isn't it? But I do say that this is an important milestone. But we've got the Serious Fraud Office investigating. We've got the Inland Revenue investigating. We've got 2 reports coming into the Biz Department about the running of this company. So there are 4 other milestones to go.
What about the knighthood? Should he keep the knighthood? Yes or no?
The House of Commons decided unanimously that he should lose it. The person that's going to kick off whether he does or not is the Prime Minister, and she's very wisely waiting for those other 4 reports before she gives a steer to the committee, which will take it away or leave it with him.
And finally, how do we prevent this from happening again, most importantly?
2 things. One is that we'll be looking at changes of the Select Committee, Pension Select Committee on the pensions law, but also we're doing joint work with the Biz Select Committee on how we reform private companies who clearly are more important than many public companies.
All right, Frank Field, thank you very much indeed. John.
He's been Theresa May's right-hand man for 7 years, first as her Home Office advisor and now as the Downing Street Chief of Staff. But Nick Timothy is tonight facing fresh questions about his role in the 2015 general election, where police are investigating whether the Conservative Party properly declared its campaign spending. A cache of secret documents, which we understand has been seen by Kent police, reveals Mr Timothy played a central role in the local campaign that defeated Nigel Farage in South Thanet, something the party has always denied. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has got hold of some of the documents. Michael.
He's been called the most powerful man in Britain. And as Joint Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Nick Timothy may even deserve that accolade.
18,800.
But before moving to Downing Street, Mr Timothy was credited with masterminding the Conservative Party's crushing defeat of Nigel Farage in South Thanet at the 2015 election. For almost a year, Kent police have been investigating the party's spending in Thanet after this programme revealed the Conservatives apparently spent tens of thousands of pounds campaigning locally for their candidate, Craig McKinley. We showed they'd spent £14,000, for instance, on rooms at the Royal Harbour Hotel for a crack team from Conservative HQ, and thousands on other items too. Money that doesn't seem to have been properly declared on McKinley's spending return. Should it have been, McKinley's campaign could have smashed the legal spending limit of just over £15,000, a cap designed to create a level playing field. Last year, we asked Mr. Timothy to do an interview about his role in South Thanet, an offer he declined. Mr. Timothy, my name's Michael Crick. I'm from Channel 4 News. This week, however, we finally caught up with him to get his account. Last November, we asked Nick Timothy a simple question. Had he worked on the local campaign in South Thanet? The Conservatives issued a statement. Mr. Timothy's job, they said, was to support the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, and that he provided assistance for the Conservative Party's national team. As for his relationship with Craig McKinley, we were told, Mr. Timothy would have given advice to any candidate who asked for it, and indeed did so. Tonight, however, Channel 4 News can reveal new evidence which tells a very different story, seemingly placing Nick Timothy at the centre of Craig McKinley's local campaign, and potentially putting him in breach of civil service rules. As early as the 26th of March, an internal email titled South Thanet Update lists help needed and states simply, Nick Timothy here, ASAP. Mr. Timothy's name also appears on the Conservatives' South Thanet contacts list. By the 29th of March, Nick Timothy seems to be very much involved in South Thanet, even down to the words on Craig McKinley's local leaflets. In a series of emails with Marion Little, Conservative HQ campaign specialist, Mr. Timothy asks for a change in approach to the local campaign. Mid-afternoon, he writes to her,
Are we not putting two-horse race on everything? Don't we need to?
An hour and a half later, he sends an email to Marion Little and other senior Conservatives entitled First Draft of Messages. He says,
Let me know what you think of the first cut of the message sheet. Please don't circulate it any further at this point. I don't want to upset people locally before I've got there. We have to define this as a two-horse race between us and UKIP as soon as possible.
Around a week later, this leaflet was dropping through letterboxes in South Thanet. It couldn't be closer, it read. Election in South Thanet is a two-horse race between the Conservatives and UKIP. Seemingly the exact strategy conceived by Nick Timothy only a few days earlier. Indeed, Mr. Timothy's fingerprints are apparently all over this local literature. And at the bottom it says, promoted by Nathan Gray, Craig McKinley's election agent. The Tories didn't mention this when we asked them last year about Mr. Timothy's role. Peter Wallace was campaign manager for Labour in South Thanet in 2015. He says this Tory leaflet knocked Labour out of the race.
The message that came from Nick Timothy is absolutely extraordinary. It is word for word. What he wrote in this document is translated into the leaflets that went out on the doorstep as appearing to be the message of Craig McKinley. It's absolutely extraordinary. We didn't think they would win, but when you knocked on the door in those final few weeks and people were all repeating like a mantra, it's a two-horse race, Labour can't win here, I get the strong impression that it wasn't that local campaign that won it, and they wouldn't have won it without the intervention of Nick Timothy and the sheer amount of money that was pumped into the area.
And Mr. Wallace says any costs linked with Nick Timothy's Thanet role should have been included in Craig McKinley's legally binding spending return.
If people came in to write leaflets and stay in hotels, people like Nick Timothy were running the campaign from outside, and that wasn't declared as a local expense, then it should have been. You deserve to be fair and open and honest with people and say that this is what we spent and this is who was involved in the campaign and this is how much we spent and when we spent it.
There's another issue. Last year, the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Jeremy Hayward, told Channel 4 News Nick Timothy had complied with the Code of Conduct for Advisers because he didn't start his campaign work till after he resigned as an advisor to Theresa May on the 30th of March 2015. But the emails we've obtained show that's not true. We know Nick Timothy was radically rewriting the South Thanet leaflet the day before he left government, the 29th of March, an apparent breach of the Advisers Code. The Cabinet Secretary now tells us that since that day was a Sunday and the day before he was due to leave anyway, it's not worth him investigating. So what was Nick Timothy's response to all this when we found him on his way to Downing Street?
Mr. Timothy, my name's Michael Crick. I'm from Channel 4 News. As we know, we've been looking at the South Thanet campaign in 2015. Could you explain to us what your role was in that campaign? You seem to have played a pretty close role in it. People say you were the brains behind the campaign. Would that be a fair description? We've come across documents showing your phone number on the contacts list for the campaign, another document saying get Nick Timothy here as soon as possible. We've got an email here that you wrote on the 29th of March. I mean, our evidence suggests that you were working on the campaign before you stopped being an advisor to Theresa May at the Home Office. You wrote this email on the 29th of March. Do you recognise it? This email suggests all sorts of changes. This email suggests all sorts of changes to a campaign leaflet. Lo and behold, here is the campaign leaflet. And all your changes are on the leaflet. You clearly had a big influence on this campaign. How much do you think it cost for you to stay in South Thanet, at the Royal Harbour Hotel and everything? Shouldn't those costs have been on Craig McKinley's campaign expenses? Have you been helping the Electoral Commission and the police with their inquiries? Have they spoken to you? Don't you think, as one of the Prime Minister's top advisors, you should be acting with transparency on this?
The Conservatives say all their spending was in line with the law. They said nothing more today about Mr. Timothy's work in Thanet, apart from repeating he was a party volunteer whose role included briefing people on Home Office matters. We understand that all these new documents have been examined by the Electoral Commission and the police.
Well, and Michael's got into Downing Street himself now, and I hope you got your breath back. Michael, where has the expenses investigation got to?
Well, there are a lot of people in politics who seem to think it's all gone away. It certainly hasn't. The Electoral Commission's long investigation into our findings is due to report within the next few weeks. Meanwhile, the police have been quietly interviewing people. One of them includes Alison Hernandez, who was the Conservative agent in Torbay and now, ironically, is a police and crime commissioner for Devon and Cornwall. But if the police and the Crown Prosecution Service are to go ahead with prosecutions, they're going to have to get a move on, because under election law, there's a deadline on prosecuting. It varies seat to seat, but it's roughly the end of May, early June, depending on the seat. In other words, 3 months away. If there are to be prosecutions, obviously South Thanet must be quite a prime contender. The people who'd be likely perhaps to be prosecuted there would be Mr. McKinley, now an MP, and his agent. I think it's pretty unlikely that Nick Timothy would be charged. But if there was a court case, his name would obviously come up, much to his dismay and the dismay of people here in Downing Street.
Michael Crick. Well, now, still on the political front, UKIP donor Aaron Banks has suggested he's ready to stand against the party's only MP at the next general election. This comes after the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage called for Mr. Douglas Carswell, the MP, to be kicked out of the party for trying to damage it. Mr. Farage said he tried to remove Mr. Carswell when he was leader in 2015, but didn't have the support within the party. Matt.
Now, Donald Trump faces the American political establishment, people used to call it the swamp, in a few hours' time, when he makes his first address to Congress. Those congressmen and women have just returned from a break in their constituencies, where many have faced the wrath of voters at town hall meetings. So, how will it affect their attitudes to President Trump's agenda as they return to Capitol Hill? Our Washington correspondent is in the deeply divided state of Virginia. Kylie, over to you.
Matt, I'm in the historic state capital of Virginia, indeed, Richmond, where monuments to the Confederacy stand alongside the River James. And just down the way, the influence of old money tobacco is visible in the processing plants that still stand here. Now, congressmen and senators, not only from this state, but as you mentioned, across America, have faced very rowdy town hall meetings in the past few days and weeks. Many of those people have found themselves really in the jaws of a quite angry constituency, people coming to complain about the agenda of the new president and to demand that their voices be heard. Now, we'll hear in a moment from an anti-Trump activist who is at one of those meetings, as well as a devotee of the new president. But firstly, let's get a sense of what's been going on.
Do your job! Do your job!
At gatherings in schools, committee rooms and restaurants across the nation, the chant is "Do your job." From Utah
Do your job! Do
to
your
Arkansas to Louisiana. Constituents have harangued their representatives in Congress, angrily demanding action. Town halls like these are an American tradition, but under Donald Trump's administration, they've become a site of resistance and rebellion. No one is immune.
We got too damn many people on food stamps.
Republican hard-hitter Mitch McConnell challenged over poverty in his home state of Kentucky.
And the last I heard, these coal jobs are not coming back, and now these people don't have the insurance they need because they're poor.
Republican voters are making some of the noise, but the majority of those who've turned out to interrogate their local representatives are Democrats in red districts, seeing red over Donald Trump's agenda.
We're going to create one great big death panel in this country that people can't afford to get insurance.
Health insurance and plans to dismantle President Obama's national health plan prompted pleading in Iowa.
Don't repeal Obamacare. Improve it. For God.
In Louisiana, abandoning the Affordable Care Act, or ACA, forced some voters to turn their backs on Republican Senator Bill Cassidy. But that wasn't the only issue they'd come to talk about.
We got another question.
I'm a cancer survivor. I'm here for ACA, but before we can have health care, before we can have anything in this country, we need to make sure that our president is not a puppet of Vladimir Putin.
The problem is Obamacare has just collapsed.
In Virginia, too, Congressman Dave Bratt faced heated questioning over Russia.
Do you favor an independent investigation into election hacking by the Russians? I'm very concerned.
The right wing of his party calls these protesters paid agitators. But those who are there say not true. They're progressives angered by the direction their new president is taking.
I'm joined now by Mary Mullins, who's an academic and a Democrat from here in Richmond, and also Michael Herzberg, who's a small businessman and a keen supporter of President Trump. Now, Mary, first of all, you were at one of those town halls.
Yes, I was in Blackstone.
Did you get any satisfaction? Was your voice heard?
Not really. We had to travel far because even though we'd been asking for a meeting since the day after the election, our Congressman Dave Bratt chose to hold the town hall far away. And we were not allowed to ask direct questions. We had to write them down.
And some Congress people indeed didn't even turn out for town halls, did they?
Right. No, they didn't. And we had, although questions were asked, the answers were pretty boilerplate. We didn't get the level of detail or depth that we were looking for.
Michael, your President Trump, has been promising to unify America, but he seems to have had a very divisive effect so far. Is that fair?
Well, I think it's only been 5 weeks that he's been president, and he's faced with some very enormous challenges. An opposing Democrat Party, a media that's out to get him a lot of times. I'm hopeful tonight with his State of the Union address that he will work on unifying the country.
Mary, what were you angry about? What do you need to hear from President Trump tonight? What words do you want to hear?
I think for me, my fear is that a lot of the rhetoric that I hear from him is not based on the facts that I think are true. And I also am concerned about a sort of wholesale tearing down of institutions that I saw grow up over my lifetime that have served and protected us, and I'm worried about that.
And Have there been, I mean, we've heard a lot of rhetoric, there have been lots of executive orders signed, Michael, but is it actually cutting through already for Trump voters? Has he done enough to satisfy the people who put him in power, after all, to change America?
I think the Trump supporters have been pleased with the things that he has done so far, such as the executive order on the coal mining regulation, some of the executive orders giving authorization for the pipelines, for the Keystone Pipeline specifically.
What about the immigration ban? I mean, that's been a bit of a mess, hasn't it? It's ended up in the courts. He's had to go back and kind of reintroduce it again, we think, this week.
Well, it's definitely been a mess. As a Trump supporter, I've followed his campaign very closely. I know exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to keep the country safe. So I understand. So hopefully this go around, they'll get it tightened up and they'll make the progress that we need.
Mary, where's the Democratic Party in all of this? It feels like a grassroots movement in people coming out to these town hall meetings. Is the party doing enough? It doesn't feel very organised, very responsive.
Well, it always frustrates me to hear that, because it presumes that our concerns are narrow, and they're not. For us, it's not that there's a fire in a grease pan on our stove. Our house is on fire and the whole neighborhood is engulfed in flames. So it is challenging to be organized. The people I'm involved with, it is definitely a grassroots campaign that's growing organically, and I think the party is doing its best to try and catch up, but they're chasing us at this point.
Okay, Mary, Michael, thank you very much for joining us. It'll be interesting to hear what he does say tonight, but for now, it's back to you in London. Thank you.
Kylie Morris in Virginia. Now, what do Elton John, crocodile costumes and karaoke have in common? Why? Snap election in Northern Ireland, of course. Changing times, changing campaign tactics. But underlying it all, the unionist-Republican divide has not been so deep for a generation. And as our chief correspondent Alex Thompson now reports, there are growing concerns that the peace process itself is being undermined.
Election Northern Ireland style, when the lampposts become lamposters. But this is the election nobody wanted. And for this, the Northern Ireland Assembly, nobody can work. The Stormont Assembly is padlocked. Ominously, the biggest parties, Democratic Unionists and Sinn Féin, now more bitterly divided than at any time since the Good Friday Peace Agreement was signed 19 years ago.
Well, if the election atmosphere has been toxic and sectarian, things could get worse. It is likely the Assembly will be shut down. Northern Ireland will be run by Westminster. This place will be closed effectively. And just when the British government has to implement Brexit. And in the context of Northern Ireland, that could mean the return of some kind of hard border between the north and the south of Ireland.
Sinn Féin's campaign resolutely anti-Brexit, which could reimpose the border Republicans hate. Party leader this morning underlining exactly that and the threat it poses for peace.
I think it's a nonsense whenever we've heard over the last number of months people talk about soft border or hard border. There's no such thing as a soft border. There absolutely is going to be a hard border. I don't think it's scaremongering. I think it's a true fact. It's a reality. Increasingly, more and more people are realising that. We're concerned for the future. We need special status on this island. We're a small island economy. We're going to be detrimentally impacted by Brexit. Our Good Friday Agreement and our peace process is going to be undermined.
The election atmospherics are getting toxic here. Sinn Féin saying the DUP just don't want to share power. Same old supremacy. The DUP countering. Sinn Féin have brought down the Assembly. Sinn Féin have caused a political crisis.
Newspapers, the polls, the pundits are saying that it's neck and neck between us and Sinn Féin, and it's important that every vote is going to be vital in this election, and it's important that people turn out to vote and have their say on the future of Northern Ireland. Do you want to see a Northern Ireland where Sinn Féin and Gerry Adams and the descendants saying we're moving backwards, or do you want to see a situation where we, the DUP, are committed to moving Northern Ireland forward, getting the Assembly up and running?
The DUP leader, Arlene Foster, declined to speak to Channel 4 News, and more widely, she's accused of avoiding the media in this campaign, which she denies. At the party's manifesto launch, she didn't take questions, citing illness. But when she has spoken, some remarks have been incendiary. Refusing to grant an Irish Language Act, she said this of Sinn Féin.
This characterisation of we should have given something to Sinn Féin to keep them appeased is not the way I do business. If you feed a crocodile, they're going to keep coming back and looking for more.
Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams' retort.
See you later, alligator.
Cue Sinn Féin Crocodile Rock Cabaret. Featuring, the word is, former IRA man Jerry Kelly among the artistes. Apparently giving 2 fingers to the world, the statue of the mighty Sir Edward Carson stands outside Stormont Parliament. The Unionist Party, once monolithic here, now in real danger of being squeezed.
We are offering a partnership of the willing, 2 parties from either side of our traditional divide, willing to work together because we know that is the only way to move things forward for our people, focusing on the fact that we have crises in our health service and in education.
The nationalist SDLP are the other partner of that possible alliance. Give us a go, they're telling the electorate. After all, the DUP and Sinn Féin can't work together.
And when we look at the words coming from the DUP and Sinn Féin, they also understand that they're going to find it very difficult to form a government. So we're likely to have direct rule if that's the result. So I'm hoping people will vote for the middle ground, parties that can work together to form a government, so we don't have to have direct rule and we can retain power here.
Tribal symbolism and politics, and the pollsters saying this election, perhaps more than others, will still all be about the traditional green and red, white and blue votes. But the cross-community Alliance Party insists that is a one-way street to stalemate.
We're saying very clearly to the public that they need to vote for parties that they know want the Assembly to work. They need to vote for parties that they know are willing to work together and cooperate together to be able to deliver good government. Because I don't believe that Northern Ireland's best interests will be served by a prolonged period of direct rule. I think that that will destabilise Northern Ireland, it will destabilise the peace process, and it's certainly not what people voted for when it came to the Good Friday Agreement.
So in the timeless beauty of this place, a genuine storm is brewing. Political crisis is an overworked phrase, but there's one happening right here, right now. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Belfast.
So let's take a look at the other parties running in Thursday's Assembly election.
Workers are still being held back because of the colour of their skin. That's according to a report commissioned by the government. It claims that workers from ethnic minorities aren't progressing at the same rate as their white counterparts. The report also says that the economy could be boosted by £24 billion if companies stamped out racial inequality. The review was led by Conservative peer Baroness McGregor Smith, the first Asian woman to lead a FTSE 250 company. She ran the outsourcing group Mighty for nearly 10 years before stepping down as chief executive last year. The review found employment rates amongst people from BME backgrounds were 12% lower than their white counterparts. They were more likely to work in lower paid and lower skilled jobs, despite being more qualified, and just 6% reached top-level management positions. The Baroness said too many bosses were uncomfortable talking about race, and she's calling for legislation to get companies to publish a breakdown of their workforce by race and by pay. I spoke to her earlier.
I was keen to do with the report was not to be hugely negative about business. Business has come a long way in many areas, was to encourage them to do more. But if they don't do more, I think we should legislate.
Do you think the government will legislate?
I hope so. If this isn't taken seriously, they should.
They've not been very keen so far, have they?
I hope that will change if they don't see the progress they hope for.
So don't you think you should go to the next level and name and shame companies?
This was never for me about naming and shaming. This was around saying, look, publish your data, set aspirational targets, start to make things better for those from different backgrounds. I think companies get it in many areas. We saw some great examples of people that were trying really hard, but I think now I'm just talking about a more consistent approach that we have done with gender. And also I think all these strands of diversity need to be brought together because nothing's been done on disability yet as well.
And when you were in charge of MITI, what were you doing about ethnic diversity in your own company?
I found that quite difficult because the pipeline was quite tough. We looked to put in aspirational targets. We looked to start to have the debate more. We looked at unconscious bias training. We started to look at mentoring.
And is unconscious bias another word for racism?
I think
It is not overt racism, but in some cases the bias could be construed to be that.
You have been criticised when you were running METI by one well-known union leader, Bob Crow, for being instrumental in driving down the wages and working conditions of British workers on zero-hour contracts. Bob Crow said as much. What do you say to that accusation?
He never actually said that to me personally.
He's on the record for saying it.
I think that's unfair.
Yeah.
I think in some cases employees want zero-hour contracts in certain industries. We always look to say you can have both. Many opted for them, but I think that is quite unfair criticism.
But he went further. He actually said that your company, and you as the head of it, were instrumental in driving down wage levels and working conditions.
Categorically
That's not just
not.
about promoting zero-hour contracts.
Categorically not. And I think if you take a look at the whole outsourcing industry and everyone that employs individuals on the minimum wage, I'm sure many would like to throw those kinds of accusations. I see a little backup in that.
And looking ahead to the future, especially with Article 50 being triggered, the kind of economic environment that we are heading towards, if you listen to John Major's speech yesterday, it's sort of Singapore off Europe, is about low taxation, low wage levels, high profitability for companies. Isn't the kind of environment that you're criticising in your report, and to some extent that you've been criticised for, going to become the norm in the future?
I don't think it should. One thing you certainly learn running a large group, and something that has really resonated with me over that time, is actually I think current workers' rights today should be totally protected in Brexit. I think, if anything, we need to continue to improve them. I don't think any large business...
That's what Jeremy Corbyn says as well.
I think improvement in working standards is important. Companies can only ever do so much, but I think all business leaders would say, OK, but let's work together on how we do that.
Baroness McGregor-Smith speaking to me earlier today. John.
After the break, we speak to writer and philosopher Tariq Ramadan, whose new book looks at the different faces of Islam and its often difficult relationship with the West. Now back to our main story. Relatives of the British victims of the Tunisian beach attack in 2015 say they will sue tour operator TUI for failing to protect holidaymakers. The inquest into the deaths of 30 British tourists concluded that they were unlawfully killed by a gunman. But the coroner rejected claims of neglect against the hotel and TUI. One man who has long warned of the instability of Tunisia following the Arab Spring is the scholar Tariq Ramadan. He was persona non grata there for 18 years for his criticism of the government. The Islamic writer and philosopher was also refused entry to the United States for 5 years under the Patriot Act, until the ban was revoked in 2010. He's an advocate of Islam's place in the West and rejects any clash of civilizations. His latest book, aptly named Islam, aims to offer an understanding of both the history of the religion and its place in the world today. But some have questioned his links to the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization several leading Republicans want designated a terrorist organization. He joins us now. Professor Ramadan, let's take Tunisia. This surely is in danger of becoming a clash of civilizations. You have an Islamist-inspired gunman who kills Western tourists, resulting in a complete collapse in the Tunisian economy. Radicalization rises and bang, pop goes the weasel.
I think we have to be very cautious with this, because if we look at facts and figures, this guy was not within a Muslim organization. He was high on cannabis when he did it. He was a break dancer. He was very far from anything that could, for us, being understood as being involved in political Islam or radicalization. Even the word radicalization means that he was first a believer, a practicing Muslim, and he became a violent, which is not the case.
Then let's ask about IS itself. I mean, he claimed he was inspired to some extent by that movement. Is that an Islamist? Is it part of Islam?
These people, yes, I cannot say they are not Muslims. And I'm not going to say it has nothing to do with Islam, because they are quoting verses of the Quran. As a Muslim scholar, what I have to say is that I have to condemn what they are doing. And we also have to look at the way they are dealing with these people around the world. All the people who are being involved in terrorist attacks in France or in Tunisia or elsewhere in the world are people who are not connected to any religious organizations. So fact and figure are important. They are Muslims, but you can have a distorted understanding of Islam. And for us as
Those
Muslims,
in Paris visited the mosque.
No, not very much. They were not connected to the mosques, and that's the point. That's the point.
Well, there was
Even
one
here,
particular
in
mosque
2000,
in the northern suburbs that a number of them attended.
Yes, they can go once or two, but they are not connected to a Muslim organization. And what we have
How can you be sure?
Because these are the facts and the figures. We studied the profiles of the people, and what we had is 80% of the people have less than 6 months of practicing and knowing Islam.
Right,
and some of them are just, the guy, we didn't know who he was, and he was, even his family say, it's not possible that he was involved in religious things.
Let's go to the Muslim Brotherhood then. After all, there was an organization voted for by the people of Egypt, eventually denied power by the military and the West. And Mr. Trump intends to try to ban the Muslim Brotherhood as an organization. Your own family is descended from Muslim Brotherhood founders.
I'm the grandson of Hassan al-Banna. I'm not a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. This was clear, and I was clear about it.
But this was a once moderate organization which is surely being radicalized by pressure from the West.
Once again, what is very important in what you are saying is that they were not radicals, and still the mainstream within the Muslim Brotherhood are not radicals and are not violent, and they are refusing this. And my take is, even if we don't agree with them, even if we are against their ideology, we can't support dictators radicalizing some of the youth in the streets. And even, by the way, when you are talking about Egypt now, it's as if it's the Muslim Brotherhood versus Sisi. No, that's not true. That's a lie. What is happening in Egypt today is democrats. There are people who are secular or Islamists saying that this is a dictatorship. Shame on us in Europe or in the West, supporting a dictators, not being able to say, if we stand by our principles,
well, how are you going to
say,
combat people like Trump who think that they are the menace?
So I think that, you know, this is what I have been trying to say in the book. I don't want, for example, always to be put in a situation where I am on the defensive, trying to say to people like Trump or people like what we have even in this country, in the UK or in Europe, you know what, we are nice people, we are good Muslims. No, what we have to do now is as citizens, with you and me, journalists and politicians, to be able to come with a word saying, you know what, Islam is a Western religion. You're not going to ban us from our own countries because we are at home in the States, we are at home in the UK, and we are going to build the future together.
The message is out there. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ramadan.
That's all we have time for. Thanks for watching.
That's Channel 4 News. Good evening.